Hello everyone, and welcome to another Fusion 360 Live. My name is Brad Tallis. I'm going to be doing the presentation today along with my friend Angelo, who's on the keyboard. What we're going to be talking about today is late design changes. So I'm going to show how you could go from a part like this to a part like this without having to start all over. And you'll notice there's some differences, like there's some curved surfaces on here, etc. So I'm going to show some tips and tricks on how you can, instead of starting over, how you can kind of manipulate the timeline to reuse some of the work that you've already done. I've included a link to the drawings. There's actually two drawings, the first one and the second one. And then I've also included a link in the description of the YouTube video to my outline that I usually put together. That way you can follow after this live stream. You can kind of try and do it yourself. So let's dive in. Like I said, we're going to start with this part here, and then we're going to transition it into this part B, like you see here. Okay. Like I mentioned, I have two drawings, this first drawing here, and then the second drawing is actually pretty simple. It just has a couple dimensions on there that are important that we'll get to a little bit later. So I'm going to be using or referencing this drawing. Now I've thrown a couple little tiny curveballs in here for you that we're going to run into, and I'm going to show you how we're going to get through those. For example, this counterbore is dimensioned from the bottom of the part, and you'll see that's going to cause a little bit of an issue for us, but we'll figure out how to work through that. Okay, so this part here is actually fairly simple, right? It kind of looks like just a couple circles and some tangent lines, and that's how I'm going to start out. So let's go ahead. I'm going to create a new design. And like I've mentioned in previous live streams, I like to create everything as a component. So I'm going to say new component, and it's right here. Or I can also say create new component. It's the very first thing in the create menu. So I'm going to say new component, and I'm just going to give this a name. I'll just call it part 925 or something like that. Okay? And that's going to create a component for me. I'm going to go ahead and expand this open. Okay, so the next thing is I want to make sure my units are set to millimeters. So I'm going to expand open my document settings right here. Click that little icon and say, let's switch this to millimeters. And then I'm going to start by creating my sketch. And I'm going to create my sketch on the top plane because according to the drawing, most of the information is in this top view. So I'm going to start by creating my sketch on the top plane. Okay. Again, just referencing the drawing here, I'm going to create a circle in the center. So I just have to get near this little center point here, my 0, 0. And the diameter is 50 millimeters. So I'm going to just type in 50 and hit enter. Okay. Then I also have the two circles on the side. And what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to randomly draw a couple circles. I don't care what size. I don't care where they are right now. Okay. What I want to do now is dimension these, but according to the drawing, they are radiuses. And you'll notice when I click on the dimension and I click on my circle, it's wanting to do a diameter. If I right mouse click, you'll notice I have the option when I'm doing my dimension to do a radius. Okay, so I'm going to switch to radius, and now you'll see it says R, right? So I can go ahead and say I want that to be 12. Okay, now I'm going to pause for a moment here. If I say create a circle, you'll notice it's in diameter mode also. If I right mouse click, I don't have that option to specify a radius. It's only when I'm doing the actual dimension that I get that option, okay? So that's why I just threw my circles on the screen. I didn't care what size they were. Then I came in, did my dimension, and was able to do the radius. Now I want both of these to be the same size, so I'm going to use the equal constraint. So I'm going to say equal. I'll click on that circle, I'll click on this circle, and now you'll notice they're the same size. And they have that equal constraint icon next to them. I also want these to be lined up with my other circle, so I'm going to use the horizontal vertical constraint. So if I say I want that point and that point, you'll see it jumps down and makes them horizontal with each other. I'll do the same thing here, and now they're lined up. Okay, so a quick way of doing that. Then the last thing I want to do is position these circles where they need to be. So I'll throw a dimension from here to here. I'll place that dimension, and in this case, according to the drawing, they're 38. So I'm going to type in 38 and hit enter, and you'll see how that moves. And the lines have turned from blue to black. Now this one here, I'm going to go ahead and throw a dimension on there also. And I'll go ahead and place it. Now, I've shown this before. I could type in 38, or I can click on the existing dimension and it's going to reference that dimension. So watch what happens when I hit enter. You'll see that it says FX, which means it's a formula. It's referencing that dimension. So if I came over here and said I want that to be 48, you'll notice that that one also has to be 48. So it's a cool way of, instead of typing in multiple dimensions and having to change each of them, you can just select a pre-existing dimension. Okay? I'm going to go ahead and move this a little bit out of the way. Okay. The last thing I want to do, according to the drawing, is I want to connect these lines to this circle. So here you can see there's our 50 diameter circle. Here's the 38 that we did and the radius of 12. So just using all that information to create our sketch. So I'm going to go into the line tool. And this is really cool. Watch what happens. I'm just going to get near this circle. I'm going to click and hold. And it's kind of hard to see, but you can see that little tangency icon is at the end of my line, so it's automatically creating a tangency constraint for me. Okay? Then I'm going to come over to this circle, and you can kind of see how it snaps to this circle. And I'm just going to keep moving around until I see that icon, that tangency icon, appear. So it's basically creating a line that's tangent from this circle and being tangent to this circle over here. And I can do that. I can start over here. Let's just click and drag, and you can see that tangency icon. And all I have to do, I'm still holding down my left mouse button. I'm just going to get near this circle and move until I see that tangency icon appear. So it's a real fast way of creating these tangent lines. So you can kind of see I just move over until it snaps to it. And we can see that those tangent icons or constraints have appeared. Okay, I'm going to say that that's all I want to do. Again, you've heard me say this multiple times. I like to keep my sketches simple. You know, I might use multiple sketches to do something. I could do a bunch of stuff on one sketch, but I like to keep my sketches simple and start building my part from that. And so what I'm going to do here is say finish sketch. And I want to extrude this. Now I'm going to show you a neat little tip. So typically you have to select the regions that you want to extrude. So I'm having to click, it looks like 5 regions to extrude. Well, instead, I'm just going to draw a selection box around the whole thing because I want to extrude all of this. I'll right mouse click, and there's my extrude command. And notice that it's going to extrude all of my profiles. So instead of having to manually click on them, all I did was just draw a selection box around them, and it selects all of them for me. So I'm going to go ahead and say extrude, and I want to extrude this up 8 millimeters according to the drawing. So I'm going to say 8. You can kind of see that nice little preview. Notice I didn't trim any of the circles or anything like that. I'm keeping everything very, very simple. And when I did the extrude, it actually trimmed everything for me automatically. So Fusion is smart enough to do that for us. Now I created that large circle. I want it back again. So again, here's why I open my component, is I can expand open my sketches, and I'll just turn that sketch on. Okay. Now, some of you might wonder, what does this little lock symbol mean next to my sketch? A lot of people think that my sketch is locked. I can't do anything with it. What that actually is, check this out. If I were to, let me just do this. I'm going to draw a line like so. Notice it's a pencil right now. It's kind of probably really small on your screen, but that's a little pencil right there. What that means is it's not a fully constrained sketch. So you'll notice that there's some open areas. This line is free to move. We haven't constrained that at all or anything. As soon as I finish my sketch or constrain it fully, like so, you'll notice that it switches to a lock symbol. And that means that it's fully constrained. So that's what that little icon means, okay? When I did my extrude, my sketch automatically turned off, so I'm gonna go ahead and turn that back on. I could rotate to the bottom of the part, but I'm gonna click and hold my left mouse button for about a second, and it's gonna allow me to probe through. So the first thing it's hitting is the face, then it's going to hit that profile, and then the other face also. So it allows me to probe through without having to rotate. And I really highlight this because, you know, I have one of these really cool 3D connection mice that you can rotate and move around and all that kind of stuff. In fact, I'll show it here for those of you that haven't seen this. It looks like this and allows me to, you know, rotate and pan and zoom and stuff. But if you don't have one of these, it's a little bit tougher to rotate around. You might use the cube up here. Maybe you use the shift middle mouse button or whatever. But instead of having to rotate, I can just click and hold and select that profile. Okay. I'll right mouse click and say extrude. Now I'm going to start to drag, and you'll notice an issue. Because the profile is cutting through my part, Fusion assumes that you want to cut through the part. But in this case, I don't. I want to join. I want to add this geometry. And I want this to come up, let's go up 16 millimeters according to the drawing. So I'm going to come up 16 from the bottom because that's where my sketch originally was. And so you can see I used a single sketch to create a multi-layered part, okay? So there's the basics of the part. Again, jumping to the drawing real quick, there's the 16 that you see that I just did right there. Okay, the next thing I want to do is to create this large hole through the middle and these counter bores. So you'll notice there's a symbol on here, this little down arrow, that means depth, so 5 millimeters deep from datum A. And so you're going to see right here, datum A is this bottom face, and this counter bore is going to be 5 millimeters from that bottom face. Actually, I probably worded this incorrectly because I'm saying it's 5 millimeters deep. I should say it's 5 millimeters from datum A. So disregard that. I might change that. Okay, so let's jump back in here. Let's do the larger hole first. And I could use a sketch to do that, but we have a really cool command called hole. And I really like this command because it gives me a lot of power. And watch what happens. So what I did is I just clicked on the face. I pre-selected it. Then I'm going to right mouse click, and about 4 o'clock it says hole. I could also come up to the create menu, and right about here, just under halfway, is the hole command, or H is the shortcut key. Okay, so I'm going to say hole, and you'll notice it gives me a little bit of a preview of what's going on here. Well, typically I start out by changing the hole type to this simple hole. Okay, now check this out. I'm going to grab and drag on this blue dot, and when I do that, you'll see a couple other little blue dots appear, and I'm going to point to it with that little arrow right there, just about 7 or 8 o'clock. There's a little blue dot. So I'm going to get near that, and it's going to snap to that dot. Okay? Well, that's the center of this cylindrical face. So I don't even have to dimension or anything like that. I'm just saying I want this to go through the center of the part. So all I have to do is get near that, and it's going to snap to it. Okay? So I don't even have to do these references. I want it to go all the way through, so I'm going to say all, and so you can kind of see how that changed, and now it's going all the way through. If it was just set to distance, it might not go all the way through. It might look something like this. Okay? So I'm going to say I want it to go through all, so it goes all the way through. Then I come in here, and I see this little preview, and I know that the diameter of this hole, I want it to be 28 millimeters according to the drawing. But it also has a small chamfer on it. And this is kind of why I like to use the hole command, because I can also do counter bored holes, or I can do counter sunk holes. So I'm going to say countersink, and notice it's actually already filled in. Let me make this a little bit different. I'll say 35 or whatever. And you can see that it's going to actually countersink that hole for me. It's going to put that angled chamfered edge right there. Well, according to the drawing, it's supposed to be 30 millimeters. So I'm going to type in 30, and I'll say OK. Now, I could have created a sketch with a circle, extruded that through, and then used the chamfer command to chamfer that edge, and that totally would have worked. But notice this is one feature in the timeline. Instead of a sketch, an extrude, and then a chamfer feature, this is all one. And I can come back and change this very easily. So instead of 28, I want it to be 20. I want this to be 22, for example, or whatever. So I want it to be a different angle for the chamfer, etc., etc. I want it to be a counterbored hole instead of a countersunk hole. So you have a lot of power in here. I can make it threaded or tapped. Is it flat or drill pointed, etc. So I personally really like the hole command. In fact, I'm going to use it to do these counterbored holes on the side. So same thing. I'm going to pre-select my face. I'll say hole. Now it remembers my last size, so it looks fairly large. So again, I'm gonna start by changing it to a simple hole, and then these guys, according to the drawing, is a 9 millimeter through. So I'm gonna do 9 for that, and you can kind of see it gives me a little bit of a preview. And then I'm gonna start to drag, and you can see I have those 2 little dots. Now, why 2? Well, this one over here is the center of this whole face. It's like the centroid of that face. This one over here is the center of this curved surface right here. So once again, I'm just gonna drag and drop it on that dot, and it's in the correct location. Okay? I'll say I want it to go through all. It figures out the distance that it needs to go. And now I'm ready to do the counter bore. So I'm going to switch from a simple hole to a counterbored hole. And you can kind of see it gives me a quick little preview of what that's going to look like. And I can come in, I can change the size or the depth of this counter bore manually. Or I can come in here and say, according to the drawing, it's a 16 millimeter counter bore. Now, here's what I was talking about. Notice the depth that it's asking for, okay? According to the drawing, the counterbore needs to be 5 millimeters up from the bottom. So this depth right here actually doesn't matter, okay? I'm just gonna leave it. I'm gonna leave it some random number. I'll go ahead and say okay. Okay, and there's my counterbore hole. But if I were to measure from that face to that face, we can see it's not 5 millimeters, it's 5.768. Okay, so how do I fix that? Well, cool little trick. I'm going to select that face and I'm going to press pull on it. Okay. Now, when I do this, it's going to allow me to move this face up or down. By default, sometimes this is set to automatic. So it's basically allowing me to move it a certain distance from where it was. I want to do a new offset. And what this is going to allow me to do is I can click this little down arrow, and I've shown this command before. I love it. It's called re-anchor. So I'm going to say re-anchor to this bottom face. And you'll notice, if I kind of look at it from the side, there's that 4.747. So it's basically saying this face, and in fact, I'll go ahead and move it here. You'll notice it's now like 6.3 from the bottom of the part. So if I were to type in 5, that face, I started to pull it down, then I'm referencing that face and I'm saying I want it to be 5 millimeters from the bottom of that face using that re-anchor command. It's extremely powerful. And the only reason I'm showing you this is because you don't know how you're going to get the drawing. Maybe they said the counterbore is 2.5 millimeters deep. Okay, that's great. But in this case, the drawing was saying there needs to be 5 millimeters of thickness here for, before that counterbore. So I was just showing you a couple different options. So we used the offset command and the re-anchor command. And if I were to measure that face to that face, we can see that it's 5 millimeters now. So that's perfect. Okay, now I want to do the exact same thing over here. Well, instead of redrawing, recreating, or whatever, we can use a couple different commands. And some of you might say, oh, just go ahead and mirror it to the other side. And that would absolutely work. So I could use the mirror command to do that. Well, I'm going to show you another command that you might not think about that works also, and that is to create a pattern. And in this case, I'm going to do a circular pattern. So I'm going to say circular. And notice it's asking for faces, bodies, features, or components. Well, I could do faces, but I'd have to manually select all of those faces. And then what happens if we end up adding a chamfer to it or whatever? So I'm going to switch this to features. I want to pattern the hole, and I want to pattern the offset that I did. Because if I only said pattern this hole, they wouldn't be at the same level because we made a change to it afterwards in time. So I'm going to select both of those. I'm going to select the hole feature and I'm going to select the offset feature. And you'll notice it selected all of those faces for me. I'll come in here and specify what's the axis. I could select this circular face, cylindrical face, or I could pick on this axis since I started out kind of in the center. It really doesn't matter in this case. I'm going to go ahead and select the axis right there. And you'll notice it gives me a preview, which doesn't make a lot of sense. But watch what happens when I go from 3 to 2. So it's still doing a circular pattern. In fact, you can kind of see that light arc right there. But we're only doing 2 of them. I'll say OK, and I now have that over on the right. Okay. So mirror would have worked, pattern also worked. Okay, the last thing according to the drawing is a 1mm fillet, which I don't have on this one. That's interesting. Need to update my drawing. So I'm going to add a 1mm fillet to this edge and to this edge. So watch what happens when I right click and say fillet. You'll notice it kind of finishes selecting that edge for me, and that's because of this tangent chain. When I selected this edge, it said, is there another edge tangent? Yep, right here, there is. It's going to continue on. Is there another edge tangent? Yep, there is. So it selects that one also. It's a pretty powerful option there. I'll go ahead and say I want that to be 1mm. It fillets it for me. I'll go ahead and select this edge here and this edge here. And you'll notice that it selects those edges. Now, I'm going to cancel that. I've shown this also where I could select a face and say I want it to be 1mm. And it actually fillets all of the edges that face is touching. But you'll notice that it's also filleting the circle here, or the counter bore. And unfortunately, because this edge is part of that face, I can't unselect it. No matter what, it always selects it. Okay? So that's why I said that edge, and it chained it all the way around. Let's make that one. And I said that edge, and we get a nice looking finished part. Okay, so I'm done with this. I'm gonna go ahead and save this. I'll call this, sorry. Let me put it in the correct location. I'll just put it in here for now. Okay, I'll just call this 925 part. Save that guy. And now you can see it's called 925 part. Okay, so I've finished my design, and maybe I have a design review with some of my fellow engineers and stuff, and we decide that this part isn't quite strong enough and maybe it needs to be mounted a little bit different. So they want 4 mounting holes, and they want it to be stylized a little bit nicer, maybe with some curved surfaces and stuff, because this part's going to be visible or something like that. And we kind of came up with an idea of making it look more like something like this, okay? And you might look at that going, wow, okay, so it's got some curved surfaces. Let me zoom up here, you can kind of see the curved surface here, curved surface here, but the part looks pretty much the same. So I should be able to maybe reuse my existing design and modify it, and that's what I'm going to show, okay? So I'm going to start by creating a sketch on this front plane. I want to curve these surfaces right here, these flat faces, and a lot of people are like, well, how would you do that? Well, I'm going to show you a cool little tip. I'm going to use surfaces in the surface menu to help me out with this. But before I get there, I need to create something that I can extrude. So I'm going to draw a circle somewhere on the screen. Again, notice it's in diameter mode. Okay, so I'm just going to place it. I'm going to place my dimension, or start my dimension, I should say, and say I want that to be a radius of 240. Now watch what happens when I hit enter. My circle disappears. I'm like, whoa, what happened? Well, if I zoom out, you'll see that it's kind of way up here in space. Okay, so I'm just going to drag that down kind of closer to where I need it to be, something like so. Okay, now I want it to be lined up. You'll notice that it's kind of off center a little bit. Okay, so I'm going to create a horizontal vertical constraint. So I'm going to say I want that point there to be vertical in the same line as that point there, and you can see it kind of shift over a little bit. Okay, now I can zoom up just a little bit more, and I'm going to move this, oops, held it too long. I'm going to move that down just ever so slightly so you can kind of see what's going on here. Now, according to the drawing, this curved surface is 3 millimeters from the top, okay? So I need to dimension the top of this circle to be in line with that. So if I go to my dimension tool, you'll notice I can click on that edge, but then when I click on this edge, it wants to go like to the center, right? Which is not what I want. Okay, so here's another cool little tip. I'm going to say dimension, I'll click on that edge, then I'm going to right mouse click, and notice right here it says pick circle arc center, which is what it did by default, or pick circle or arc tangent. So I'm going to click on that guy, click on this circle. In fact, I'll click way over here and notice my result. Okay, so instead of jumping all the way down to the center of the circle, it's now going to the tangent point right there. I'll go ahead and place that dimension, and we know it needs to be 3 millimeters. I'm going to type in 3, and we can see that sure enough it pushed that arc, or circle in this case, down to be 3 millimeters from the top. Kind of a cool little trick there. Okay, just remember, right mouse click is your friend. It has lots of helpful options in there. So I've created my correct size circle, radius of 240. I've made sure it's lined up perfectly in the center, which it is, and then I've positioned it where it needs to be. And you'll notice the little lock symbol, which means that this sketch is fully constrained, which is good. Okay? Okay, so I have this circle. Now here's where I'm going to jump over to my Surface tab. And under the Create menu, you can see that we can extrude surfaces, revolve, sweep, loft, etc. By the way, this ruled surface we just added this last weekend. Really, really cool. Make sure you check out the What's New if you haven't already. If you go into the question mark, What's New, it'll bring up a web page, which of course is on the wrong screen. Let me drag this over. Hopefully you can see this. And you can see all of the cool enhancements that we've done. And one of them is, for example, parting line in draft, the new ruled surface. See it in action so you can kind of watch these videos and stuff like that. So you'll see he's actually like dragging these edges just by kind of rotating them around and stuff like that. It's pretty amazing. So anyways, I digress. Make sure you take a look at the What's New if you haven't already. Okay, so I'm in my surface. I'm going to say extrude, and I'm going to click on that profile. I'm just going to start to drag, and you'll notice it's creating a thin-walled surface. There's no like thickness to it. It's not a watertight model. I also want it to go symmetric because I want this new surface to expand past my existing part. And watch what happens when I say okay. I get my original body, which is this part here, and then I get this open shell looking type body, which is this surface right here. Okay, now here's where the magic happens. I've shown this in some of my other live streams. I'm going to jump back to my solid tab. Under modify is replace face. Okay, now notice the pop-up that comes up. Replaces one or more part faces with a different face. The new face must completely intersect the part, okay? And that's why I purposely made this larger than it needed to be. If it was too small, this wouldn't have worked, okay? So I'm gonna come in here and say replace face. What's my source? And notice it says faces, so I can select multiple faces. So I'm gonna grab that guy there and that guy there. Now you might be saying, well, what about all of the fillets that are touching that face? Check this out. What's my target face? My target face is going to be that surface. And look what it did. I'll go ahead and zoom out a little bit. I'll say okay. I'll turn off that surface, and it actually replaced that flat face with that curved surface, and it kept all of my fillets for me automatically. So let me undo, and let me do that again. So notice they're flat right there. They got fillets on them, etc. I'll say replace face. I'll say I want to replace that guy and that one there. The target face is going to be this face here. And you can kind of see it jump up. In fact, you can kind of see the surface on that top surface there. Now I don't need this extra little body anymore, so I'm going to turn it off. Okay, so I'm just going to hit the little eyeball next to it and turn it off. Also, notice what happened to my counterbores. If I say measure from that face there to that face there, they're still 5 millimeters in thickness. That was one of the requirements according to the drawing. But the counterbore is now deeper due to the fact that we changed that surface. So, hopefully, you're finding that replace face is a pretty powerful tool. Some people might be like, oh, I'm gonna have to go into direct modeling and pull on that face. Other people might be like, oh, I'm gonna have to create surfaces and extrude up to those surfaces, etc. The replace face command is extremely, extremely useful. Okay, so now what I want to do is, let's take a look at our drawing here. So you can kind of see this is the curved surface right there. What I want to do now is maybe create this extra material. It's kind of hard to point out, but you can kind of see this little wing right here, or these little webbings, or whatever term you want to use. So I want to create those next. And it's also kind of hard to see, but they are also crowned right here, the 240 radius. So how would we do that? Well, I'm going to use some information here to help me create that. So a radius 20 circle that's 52 millimeters from the center. So I want to create a new sketch on the bottom face here. So I could go back to my original sketch, but in this case things are changing. This is way back at the very beginning. I'd be a little bit nervous that none of these features would show up if I were to go back to my original sketch. So I'm going to create a new sketch like so. Okay. I'll create a circle over here somewhere. Again, don't care what size. I'll dimension that, right click, radius, place my dimension, and that is supposed to be a 20 millimeter radius. Okay. I know that it needs to be tangent to this guy, so I'm going to go ahead and click and drag with my line tool, and you can see the tangent. Then I'm going to get near here until I see that tangent icon there. Same thing here, tangent, until I see the tangent icon. It's a little hard to see, but it's right underneath my cursor. It kind of snaps to it. And if I were to move this circle now, you'll notice that those lines stay tangent to it. It's pretty cool. Okay, so I want that point and that point to be vertical with each other. Boom, it snaps it to be vertical. And then finally, according to the drawing, the dimension actually comes off of the bottom of, oops, wrong drawing, sorry. The dimension comes off the bottom here. Okay, again, I said I threw a couple curveballs in here just to let you learn some new commands. So I'm going to right mouse click, and instead of dimensioning to the center, I'm going to say tangent. I'll click on that circle there. I'll click on that point there. Place my dimension, and you can see that the dimension is tangent to that circle. And according to the drawing here, 52 millimeters. So we can see that kind of pushes everything up. The lines are turned black, and my sketch has that little lock symbol next to it. So I know that this is a fully constrained sketch. So I'm going to say finish sketch. Okay. Let's take a look at this guy now. And I'm going to select these three regions, right mouse click, and say extrude. You've seen me do this multiple times. I hardly ever go up to the menus. They're all usually in the right mouse click. It shows you the commands that make sense. So instead of having to figure out which command, I let Fusion show me which command. So I'm going to say extrude. I'm going to start to drag up. Okay. Now I'm supposed to extrude up 8 millimeters. Now notice what happened. Okay. So I'm going to have to say minus 8 millimeters. But notice what's going on right here. We're going to run into an issue here. And this is the exact reason why I picked the design the way it is, because this is what's going to happen to all of you also. It's not perfect every single time. In fact, I did a live stream a little while back where I called it Stump the Chump, where I just randomly picked a drawing and kind of struggled through it. And wanted to show different methodologies, different ways you could do things. Well, this is a prime example of that. You go to make a change, you want that to be 8 millimeters thick, but I get these weird faces. So we're going to learn how to fix this kind of stuff. So I would be a little bit nervous that this could cause some problems, and I want to work almost like on this flange as a separate body. So I don't want it to calculate along with all these other fillets. So instead of joining, I'm going to say make this a new body. It's 8 millimeters tall. I'll say OK. And now you can see that this is its own separate body from that guy. Okay. It's in the correct location and everything, but I'm going to kind of work on it by itself until I'm happy with it, and then I'll combine it with the original body. Okay, so now I want to do the concave part, and just like before, it's the same radius, it's the same distance, so I'm going to create a sketch on this front face right here. I'll draw a circle, throw a dimension on there. Make sure it's set to radius, and it's supposed to be 270. I'm sorry, 240. And it disappeared, so it's way up there. So I'm just going to drag that closer to where it needs to be, like so. And just like before, I'm going to constrain it vertically, like so. Kind of see how that jumped across. And I'm going to add a tangent dimension. I'll click way up here, like so. Now, you'll notice it's not letting me, it's not letting me, oh, there we go. I could pick that point there. I could pick that edge, but you'll notice it's not letting me pick any of those points there. So I could project it, or I could just grab like this bottom line, and I'll say 3. Okay. Sorry for my little reminder that says keep open, because I never know if my live streams are going to go longer or not. So I always block off some time for that. Okay, so I now have this circle. It's perfectly centered, and it's 3 millimeters up. I'll finish my sketch. Now I could use the replace face again, but I'm going to show you another method that would work in this case, where I'm kind of machining some stuff away. So instead of adding material, that's where replace face really kind of shines, is adding material. But I could just split this body, right? So I'm going to come in here and say split body. What's the body to split? Well, because they're separate, it's only going to affect this new little body, this body 3. Okay, and it's not going to split body 1. what is the splitting tool? This circle. You kind of see it gives it a nice little preview. It's almost doing like what I did earlier. It's kind of creating a face and using that to split that body. And now you'll notice I've got body 3 and body 4. Well, I don't need body 3. So I'm going to right click on it and say remove. Now, I get asked a lot, what's the difference between delete and remove? Okay, so the best way I can kind of explain this is think of like an IKEA bookcase, okay? And it has a bunch of shelves, and I want to remove one of those shelves out of the bookcase. I would say remove, and I'm basically taking that, and it's no longer part of my bookcase, but I haven't destroyed it. I haven't, gotten rid of that shelf. I've just removed it out of there. If I said delete, you can kind of think of it as we're trashing that shelf. We're destroying it, we're wood chipping it, burning it, whatever. It is no longer there, and I can't bring it back. And if any of my drawings or my models referenced that shelf and I deleted it, it would cause downstream problems. So I usually say 99% of the time, you're probably going to want to remove your part instead of deleting, okay? So I'm going to say remove. And what's cool is you'll notice it removed it. It's no longer here. However, it did put it in my timeline. So my shelf is still there. I can always go back and get it and put it back in my design. Whereas if I had deleted it, it might have caused downstream problems. Okay? Hopefully that makes sense. Okay, I want this on the other side. I could use the pattern command. I've already done that for this, so let's use the mirror command in this case, just to show that it really doesn't matter. So I'm going to say body. I want to mirror that body. What's my mirror plane? Let's do this face right there. I'll say OK. And now you'll notice I have 3 separate bodies. Okay. So let's combine those into one. So I'll come in here and say combine. Now, I don't show this all that often. It's really cool. If you hit the S key, which stands for shortcut, it will bring up shortcuts, like your most commonly used commands. And you can edit these or whatever, but what's kind of cool is you can search. So I can search for combine. So you can see as I start to type in COM, so there's the combine command, okay? I can actually run it from right here. I can also add it to my shortcuts. So instead of having to remember, because I use the combine command all the time, instead of having to remember it's in the modify menu and then come here, I can just hit the S key and there it is, right? Because I just added it to my shortcuts. So really cool tip is using the S key to search for commands, and then also add your commonly used commands that you don't want to have to go to the menu every single time for. Okay, so my target body is going to be this guy. That's what I want to join them to. My tool body is going to be that guy, and we want to join them together. Now, if I said keep tools, it would keep the original bodies. But watch what happens. I'm going to say OK, and we're back to one body now. Okay? Now I'm going to zoom up. I still see a little issue here. We might run into that, just FYI. So, but let's keep moving forward. So I have this all as one body now. Now, what I'd like to do, let's take a look at the drawing. It's going to be a little hard to see, but I have this curved surface here, and then I have this webbing, or whatever you want to call here. I want to now create these other arms, or whatever term you want to use. But notice they're flat. but we've already curved these guys. So how am I going to do this? So here is the power of going back in time, okay? Excuse me. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna create a circular pattern. This is pretty cool. So check this out. I'm gonna say circular pattern, okay? I'm gonna make sure that my pattern type is set to features because I wanna pattern some features, but I wanna pattern some features way back in time. So I'm gonna pattern a bunch of this stuff way back here before we did some of these replace faces and stuff like that. So I want to make sure I grab that extrusion and that extrusion. I also want to make sure I grab the hole, and I want to also pattern the counterbore holes and the offset. And because I patterned it over there, I'm going to grab that pattern there. So I basically am grabbing pretty much every single step I use to create my original part, except for the sketch. You don't really pattern sketches. So I'm doing the extrude, I'm doing the second extrude, which is the part that goes up a little bit higher. Then I did the hole through the middle, and then I did the counterbore and the offset, and then finally the pattern of that. So I'm going to get both of those counterbores. Okay, and this will make more sense as we go through. Now I'm going to go ahead and say, what's my axis? I'll pick that center axis right there. You can kind of see I get a quick little preview. It's trying to do 3 of these. Well, I only want 2 of them. But notice what happens when I say 2. It's basically patterning at 180 degrees. So that doesn't work. I don't want 3 of them, but if I say 4, you can kind of see the preview that I'm going to get here. Okay, so I'm going to actually circular pattern this 4 times. Now watch what happens to my bodies over here. I'm going to go ahead and say OK, and you'll see that we get a result that looks like this. But notice they're flat, okay? So I'm going to go ahead and start turning some of these guys off, okay? Now, for whatever reason, this counterbore didn't go through, which is odd. The hole did. Let me make sure I did that correctly. One quick second. Okay, let's try that one more time. So I'm going to create a pattern. Circular pattern, features. I want to make sure I grab everything. Okay, adjust is correct. Axis, I'll maybe do that guy. Let's just see what happens with that. Quantity of 4. I'll say okay. No, I'm getting a weird result. Okay, well I'll have to resolve that here in just a minute. But basically, because I now have a whole bunch of bodies, some of these don't matter. Like this guy right here, I don't need 2 of them on top of each other. So there's basically 2 right on top of each other. You can kind of see the body 8 and body 6, right? So yeah, it's interesting that it didn't do the holes. This worked perfectly when I practiced it. Of course, it doesn't work perfectly here. So let me turn one of these guys off and we'll fix it. So I don't need body 6, so I'm going to go ahead and remove that out of there. I also don't need body 7, so I'm going to remove it out of there. Okay. And typically, this would be over here. Kind of surprised that it's not 100% sure why. Okay, but now I'm left with 2 bodies. And we can kind of see that guy there and that guy there. So let's turn off the one we don't need right now, and let's fix this. Let's come in here and do a circular pattern again. I could do features. I could also, in this case, I could do faces. So I could select all of these faces if I wanted to. Grab the axis. Again, do 2 of them. Say OK. Let's turn that body back on. And now I basically reused that geometry to help me over here. Okay. Now I want to combine these together. So this is my target body. My tool body will be this other one. We want to join them together. I'll say okay. And I'm back to one singular body. Okay. Now I want to continue adding these fillets because we want these edges to be filleted. And I've shown this before. If I come into my fillet command and I click on a face, it'll actually select all of the edges. But watch what happens when I type in 1. I get an error message. The fillet chamfer could not be created. And it highlights it in red. And I foreshadowed this earlier. I said, I'll bet you this is going to cause a problem down the road. And this is exactly what you might run into as you're doing parts like this. And you're like, well, I want to fillet all the way around. But because of this weird corner right here, I have a feeling it's failing because of that. Well, that's because it's kind of rolling over into this fillet. So I'm going to just click on that fillet, and way back here in time, it shows me which feature was used to create that fillet. So I could select that, right mouse click, and say suppress. Now notice that that isn't, rolling over into a different face. So let's try our fillet again. So I'm going to say that face there, a size of 1 millimeter, and voila, that worked. In fact, I'll go ahead and do both of these at the same time. Okay, so what just happened? Let me back up, okay? This is where messing with the timeline can sometimes help you and sometimes hurt you. So I tried to fillet this edge, and because it's going all the way around, you can kind of see there's this extra little what I would call a sliver face right here. And mathematically, it can't figure out what to do there. So what I said, well, I want to solve it before this fillet is solved. So I clicked on it, I suppressed it. I'm basically saying don't solve that fillet, okay? Then I come in and say fillet this edge, or this face I should say. Instead of selecting a whole bunch of edges, I can grab the 2 faces, boom, boom. I've just done, I don't know how many fillets. I'll go ahead and say okay. Okay, now magically I should be able to unsuppress this feature. But notice what happens. I get an error message and my fillets went away. Why? Okay, this is where it gets a little bit deep. We're going to be talking about going back to the future and forward and back in time and all that kind of stuff. So think about what just happened here. I suppressed this, so this was no longer being calculated, and I was able to add those fillets. But when I unsuppress this, it's like a recipe. It starts at the beginning, and it does the extrusions, it does the holes, it does the fillets right here, and continues on, and then it tries to fillet that face. But because this was created way back here in time, it failed again, right? So it makes sense that I should have this maybe be after this guy. So I'm going to click and drag that fillet all the way to the end. It's kind of hard to see, but I'm going to drop it there and notice what happens. This works, but the fillet I just dragged is giving me an error. Okay, so notice what we did here. It used to be back here, I think right about here before this sketch. I just changed the past by dragging that feature all the way to the current location. So now it's doing the recipe, it's going along, and it's able to create that fillet because it hasn't created this fillet yet. Okay? But why did this one fail? Well, if you right click on it and you say review warning, it'll actually tell you 8 reference failures. The edge reference is lost, and it actually highlights it in red. And hopefully you guys are figuring out what's going on here. This fillet was created on edges before they were changed in time to a curved surface. Okay, so unfortunately in this case, it's looking for these edges in time, but then we came along, we created that surface, we did the replace face, etc. So it basically lost, it didn't know where those edges are anymore. So I'm actually going to edit this fillet feature. In fact, you'll notice there's no edges in here at all because it lost the reference to them. But all I have to do is say it was that edge and that edge, that edge and that edge, and they were a radius of 1, and it allows it to be created. I know this is a little deep, hopefully it's not confusing, but we basically rearranged our timeline quite a bit. We reused existing features, okay? We rotated them around. We reused them back in time before they were curved to give us these guys here. We were able to reuse the counter bores, all that kind of stuff. We fixed an issue for whatever reason. I don't know why it happened. We were able to fix it by reusing that counter board hole. And then I was able to fillet these edges by basically reorganizing when this edge rolled over onto this fillet. And that was what was causing the problem. So we basically got rid of that fillet and then just reassociated it to the edges that we wanted. Okay. So the last thing is to add a couple more fillets. So on this edge here, that edge there, and that edge there. Notice I'm able to pick through. I don't even have to rotate because I'm in the fillet command. I'll say 1 millimeter fillet. I also need to add that edge there, and now I get a nice looking casting. So I'll do the same thing here. Now, how did I know that I forgot an edge? I'll show you. I'll go ahead and click there, and I noticed that that corner looked kind of weird. I was like, oh yeah, I need to add in that edge, and it recalculates and figures out how it would intersect and make that look really, really nice. I'll go ahead and say okay, and we are done with our redesigned part. So we went, let's see, from this guy to this guy without having to do a lot of recreation. Pretty much the only sketch I ended up having to do was this guy here to kind of create those webs. The rest of it was pretty simple. So, okay. Of course, I thought this would be a shorter one. I went 4 minutes over. Hopefully you learned something from this. Again, the outline and the 2 drawings are in the description of the video. So please feel free to give that a try. I might actually throw this part over to Angelo and see how he would go about fixturing it and actually how he would add tool paths to it. So if you guys are interested in that, keep an eye out for a future live stream. I hate to put Angelo on the spot, but hopefully he's willing to do that. So with that, I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day and have fun fusioning.